She laughed then. The real one. The one that escaped before she could stop it. And for a while, that night, it was almost enough to make him forget the deadline, the fear in her voice. The door still bolted somewhere he couldn't see. Almost. The orders came through on a Tuesday. In an email with a subject line so bland, it took Sebastian 3 readings to understand what it was asking of him. 6 weeks lead time. A region he'd sworn after the last rotation he would not go back to. Rena called it an opportunity, the way editors always called the worst assignments opportunities. And he sat holding the phone against his ear that night, wondering how he was supposed to say any of this to Nadia when he hadn't yet found a way to say the much smaller truth that had been sitting in his chest for months. I have to go back, he told her, when the silence between them had stretched long enough that she asked if he was still there. Where? He told her. He heard something shift in her breathing on the other end of the line. Some catch she tried and failed to smooth over before it reached him. That's the region, she said carefully, where the checkpoint was. Yes. You're going back to the road. It's not the same road. It's 400 kilometers from it. I checked. He heard how thin that sounded even as he said it. The geography of grief didn't respect kilometers, and they both knew it. She didn't say anything for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had a quality he hadn't heard from her before. Something braced, like a person setting their feet before a blow. Sebastian, I think it's time we met. He sat up so fast the phone nearly slipped from his hand. 4 years. 4 years of a voice in the dark, of a woman who was, by her own insistence, not supposed to be a person to him. And now, out of nowhere, on the eve of the worst assignment of his career, she was offering him the one thing he'd stopped letting himself hope for. "Say that again," he said. "I want to make sure I heard you. If you're going back there, if there's a version of this where you don't come home, I'm not going to let the last thing between us be a phone line. I have to see you first. I have to tell you some things in person that I should have told you a long time ago." Something cold moved through him at that, underneath the joy. A warning he didn't yet have the vocabulary for. That sounds like the kind of thing people say before very bad news. "It might be," she said. "I don't know how else to say it. I've been rehearsing this conversation for 4 years, and I still don't know how to start it." They agreed on a place. A small, unremarkable cafe near the hotline's offices, chosen by Nadia, who set the terms the way she'd always set the terms of everything between them. And Sebastian, for once in his professional life, did not argue with a source about ground rules. He would have agreed to meet her in a war zone if that was what it took. The 3 days before the meeting were the longest of his adult life, longer than any siege he'd covered, any convoy he'd waited out under fire. He caught himself rehearsing what he'd say, discarding every version as either too much or not enough, until he settled on the only thing that felt true. That whatever she was about to tell him, he'd rather know it and lose her than keep not knowing and lose himself instead. he did not expect, walking into the cafe, to recognize her instantly. Not from any photograph, because there had never been one, but from something harder to name. The set of her shoulders, the particular stillness of a person accustomed to holding other people's grief so carefully, it had become a physical posture. She was sitting at a corner table with her hands wrapped around a cup she wasn't drinking from. And when she looked up and saw him, something crossed her face that he would spend the rest of his life trying to properly describe. Not surprise, because she'd clearly known exactly what he looked like for longer than he'd known her name was real. Something closer to grief arriving early. Grief that had been waiting 4 years for permission to finally show itself. Nadia, he said, and the word came out rougher than he meant it to. Sit down, Sebastian, she said. Please, before I lose my nerve. He sat up close in the ordinary light of an ordinary cafe. She looked both exactly and nothing like he'd pictured. Younger around the eyes, older around something harder to locate. A tiredness that 4 years of late night calls hadn't fully explained until now. Sitting across from the source of it. You asked me once, she said, if we'd met before, if there was a version of this where I already knew you. I told you it was an educated guess. That wasn't true. I lied to you, and I've hated myself for it every single day since. And I need you to let me finish before you say anything. Because if you stop me, I don't think I'll be able to start again. Sebastian said nothing. His hands, flat on the table, had gone very still. She wrapped both hands tighter around the cup she hadn't touched, as if it were the only stable thing left in the room. I need you to understand something before I say his name, she said. I need you to understand that I have hated you, Sebastian. Not always, not even mostly by the end. But there were nights early on when I hung up the phone and hated you so completely I frightened myself with it. And I kept picking up anyway. I want you to know both of those things happened at the same time for a very long time. Why are you telling me this now? He asked. After 4 years, why now and not the first night before He stopped himself, but she heard the rest of it anyway. Before you loved me, she finished for him quietly, because I told myself that first year that I would stop calling once I understood enough. And then I understood enough, and I still didn't stop. And by the second year, I no longer had a version of the truth that wouldn't destroy something I'd already let myself need. I kept choosing the coward's timeline, Sebastian. Every single day I didn't tell you was a day I chose it again. I'm not going to pretend that was brave. It wasn't. It was the opposite of brave, dressed up as patience. 4 years ago, Nadia said, before the first time you called the hotline, I read a dispatch, a byline. Sebastian Reyes, reporting from a checkpoint on a road I have never once been able to say the name of out loud since. It was about a convoy. It was about a young soldier in that convoy who didn't come home. The cafe noise seemed to recede all at once into something very far away. I kept that dispatch, she said, because it was the last thing anyone outside the army ever wrote about him. I read it so many times the paper went soft. And when your call came in 4 years ago, when you gave me your name that first night, before you'd said anything else, I recognized it instantly. I could have transferred you. I could have told the supervisor I wasn't the right person to take the call. I didn't. I picked up anyway, and I let you keep calling because some part of me needed to know the man who'd been standing near him when it happened. And then another part of me, a part I'm not proud of, didn't want to stop finding out. Nadia. His voice had gone very quiet. Whose name are you not saying? She looked at him then, straight on, and he watched her decide in real time to finally open the door he'd stood outside of for 4 years. His name was Elian, she said. Elian Marek. He was 26. He was my husband. The name landed in Sebastian like something physical, like a hand closing around a bone he hadn't known was fractured. He knew that name. He had written that name once in a dispatch he had filed at 3 a.m. from a hotel room that smelled of diesel. The name of the soldier he had stood 4 feet from, on a road that no longer had a name he could say without his throat closing. The soldier who had, in Sebastian's telling and in memory both, died because a convoy took a route Sebastian himself had suggested to the unit commander as safer than the alternative. The soldier whose name lived in the locked room Sebastian had spent 9 years walking past without breaking stride. Early on, Sebastian repeated, and the word came out broken in a way he didn't try to hide. The road came back to him whole, the way it always did once it started, not in fragments this time, but entire. The way memory sometimes gives you back the worst days of your life with a clarity it withholds from the good ones. The heat coming off the asphalt in waves, the commander's radio crackling with 2 possible routes, and a decision that needed making inside a window of maybe 4 minutes. Sebastian embedded, not a soldier, not supposed to have an opinion that carried any weight at all, saying what he'd seen 2 days earlier on a different convoy. The western road's clear. I walked it myself. Nobody had asked him to have an opinion. He had given one anyway, because giving opinions was what 9 years of confidence in his own reporting had trained him to do. And the commander, trusting a source who had proven reliable before, had taken the western road. He had written about the aftermath in the 3rd person, the way the job demanded. A convoy struck, 1 soldier killed, 3 wounded. The language of dispatches designed to carry information without carrying the weight of it. He had never once, in 9 years, written the sentence that was actually true, that he had helped choose the road that killed a 26-year-old man he'd shared cigarettes with 3 nights running. A man who talked about his wife the way other soldiers talked about home itself, like she was the entire reason the war had an ending worth surviving toward. You knew him, Nadia said. It wasn't a question. I was there. His voice had dropped to almost nothing. Nadia. I was the one who told the commander that road was clearer. I'd walked it 2 days earlier with a different unit. I told them it was the safer route. I've never told anyone that. I've never told you that. Something in Nadia's face broke open. 4 years of careful composure giving way all at once. I know, she whispered. I've known since the first week you called. I read every report. I know exactly what happened on that road, Sebastian, better than you do, because I spent 2 years of my life reading every version of it I could find, trying to understand how a man I loved could be alive on a Tuesday and gone by Wednesday because of a route someone thought was safer. Then how could you? His voice cracked. How could you sit on that phone with me for 4 years, knowing I was the reason? Because the first night you called, Nadia said, tears finally falling, unhidden now. I heard a man who was drowning in the exact same grief I was drowning in, and some broken part of me needed to understand you before I could decide whether to hate you. And then the months went by, and I understood you, Sebastian. I understood you so completely that hating you stopped being possible, and loving you started being the only thing that made any sense of any of it. And I had spent 4 years terrified of exactly this moment, because I always knew that the day you learned the truth, you would look at me the way you're looking at me right now. How am I looking at you? Like I'm the wife of a man you got killed, she said. and not like the woman who's spent 4 years falling in love with you anyway. The silence between them in that small, ordinary cafe was unlike any silence that had ever passed between them on the phone. Heavier, more dangerous, freighted with 4 years of a truth that had finally found its way into the open air. Sebastian sat with his hands pressed flat against the table, staring at a woman he had loved as a voice in the dark for longer than he'd loved anyone in his adult life, and understood with a clarity that felt almost violent that every tender thing between them had been built unknowingly on his side and knowingly on hers, over the grave of a man Sebastian had helped put there. "Say something," Nadia said, when the silence had stretched past what either of them could bear. "Please, anything. I've imagined this moment 100 different ways, and none of them do you just sit there. What do you want me to say?" His voice came out flatter than he meant it to, flattened by something too large to fit through the ordinary channels of speech. "That I'm sorry. I've been sorry for 9 years. Sorry was never going to be enough for the family of a man I helped kill. And it's sure as hell not going to be enough now that I know his wife spent 4 years falling in love with the man who did it." "Don't," Nadia said sharply, some of her old composure returning as anger, which seemed to steady her more than grief had. "Don't you dare turn the story into a story where you're the only one who gets to be destroyed by it. I buried him, Sebastian. I read the reports. I know exactly what happened on that road, better than your own guilt has ever let you admit to yourself. And I chose with everything I know to keep answering the phone. That wasn't an accident, and it wasn't a mistake I didn't understand I was making. Don't take that choice away from me now by deciding you're the only villain in this room. He looked at her then, rarely looked, and saw something he hadn't let himself see across 4 years of a disembodied voice. A woman who had built an entire second life out of the wreckage of the first one, who had turned her own unanswered grief into a hotline she staffed at 2 a.m. for strangers who had somehow found her way to loving the one person who might have had the least right to be loved by her, and had done it anyway, with her eyes open the entire time. I need air, he said finally, and stood. And Nadia did not try to stop him, because some part of her, the part that had rehearsed this moment for 4 years, had always known this might be exactly how it ended. Sebastian, she said, as he reached the door, and he stopped, not turning around, one hand on the frame. For whatever it's worth, I'm not sorry I picked up the phone. I've never once been sorry, even now. If I could go back and do it again, knowing everything I know, I would still pick up. He didn't answer. He walked out into a grey afternoon with the name Elian Marek sitting in his chest like a second heartbeat, and somewhere behind him, in a cafe that would never again feel ordinary to either of them, Nadia sat alone with a cup of coffee gone cold, and 4 years of careful silence finally, irreversibly broken. He walked for a long time, through streets he didn't remember choosing, until the grey afternoon gave way to a greyer evening, and his legs simply stopped somewhere near the river, as though his body had decided for him that this was as far as running would take him. He stood there a long time, watching water move past in the dark, turning the name Elian Marek over and over, trying to reconcile it with the road, with the commander, with the version of himself who had once believed that suggesting a safer route was the same thing as doing something good in a place where nothing good seemed possible. He thought about hanging up on grief the way Nadia had once hung up on him. Abruptly, a hand pulled back from a flame, and understood for the first time how much it must have cost her every single time she hadn't. His phone buzzed once near midnight. A text, not a call. The first she had ever sent him outside their scheduled hours. I meant what I said at the door. Whatever you decide about us, I needed you to know that first. I'm not sorry. I could never be sorry it was you. He didn't answer that night either, but he didn't delete it, and he read it 7 more times before he finally slept. And somewhere underneath 9 years of guilt and 4 years of a love he hadn't had a name for until an hour ago, some small and stubborn part of him had already, quietly, without his permission, begun deciding what he was going to do next.